Welcome to The Self You Seek with Dr. Brendan. This podcast might just change your life. I'm Dr. Brendan Doherty, a medical doctor, psychiatrist, business owner, inner guidance coach, and fitness fanatic. On this show, I explore topics and engage with individuals to help you unlock your full potential. My mission is to support your journey towards self-actualization, complete well-being, and a life aligned with your authentic needs. There will be actionable insights, inspiring stories, and I will lean into my curiosity to get the story behind the person, understanding the deep truths and expertise of our guests. Get ready to feel empowered, and, if you desire, some information that might just change your life. And a quick reminder, this podcast is not a substitute for medical or mental health advice and should not be treated as such. The content here is for informational purposes only. Always consult with qualified medical and therapeutic professionals before making decisions related to your health and mental well-being. And now for the show. Welcome to The Self You Seek. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Zahra Ciardi. Zahra and I are friends. We've gone back since working together at Headspace, which is a mental health service in Australia. I have this funny memory there actually of it was at the very start of COVID, and then someone came into the office and said they'd been at a wedding where COVID and everyone was so anxious, and it was like a bomb had dropped off and the whole place emptied in like 20 minutes and we never came back to work. It was all remote from then. Anyway, I just thought I'd drop that in there. But Zahra is a psychologist and predominantly based in Australia and sometimes in Bali, and she has an online practice, and I think she has a really amazing story, and she's also become very expert in a number of therapies, and I thought our audience would really appreciate to hear some of those. And some of those therapies I don't know a whole lot about either, so I'm really keen to talk about that, and also intensive sort of one-to-one therapy, which is more of a modern approach to things. So welcome, Zahra. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. That was really well summarized. And that's a really funny memory about Headspace, actually. I wasn't there that day. I was sick. I had called in sick. So I didn't witness that. But I know that you and I worked together at the office for at least a few months before then.
Yes.
But then it was all just Zoom after that.
Yeah, and then when someone did come into the office, it'd be just by themselves, no one around.
Yeah,
It's like this deserted, weird.
It was weird. Yeah. And it was interesting because we still developed a really good friendship through that, despite that.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
And as COVID got a little bit less intense, I think we all eventually went out as a team and in outdoor areas.
We did a hiking. We went to the Blue Mountains.
Yeah, it was all very wholesome.
And we really appreciated it.
Oh, that was amazing. Yeah, it was freedom all over again.
Yeah. Oh, wow. We have been friends for a little while now, hasn't it? 2019, I would say.
Yeah.
It's been a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great to see you grow. And part of what I think people really I want to hear more about is, and I know a little bit about this, but you have a really cool story. I know that you were born in Kuwait, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
it's a funny part of the story too. Technically in Damascus, Syria, but documented as Kuwait.
No
Immigration, don't come at me.
What do you mean? So technically...
So the paperwork states Kuwait, but actually what really happened was I was born in Damascus in Syria.
No way.
But we were, my father and mother are Kuwaiti. I think the word is denaturalized, where your citizenship is retracted and you're sort of exiled from a country. I don't know the full story around this, but I do know that my father was a bit of a troublemaker. And Kuwait is a monarchy, not a democracy. And he wanted a democracy, which is understandable. But I think he fought too hard for that. And that led to a blacklisting. I think he's still blacklisted to this day. So he can't actually go back. But Mum was pregnant with me at the time, so I was born in Damascus. But as we came to Australia as refugees, it was really complicated finding my birth certificate. So, yeah. People get very creative when they're refugees and they need to make their way to another country. So
no kidding.
I think it was forged.
Okay, there you go.
I feel like the Australian government's going to knock at my door any minute now.
Time will tell.
We shall find out.
One of those statute of limitations that comes into place.
Yeah.
We can't go back anyway. So, yeah, what happened then? So how old were you when you came to Australia? What happened before that?
So we spent 2 years in Syria, which I don't have any memories, of course, but we moved to Iran after that, and we lived there for about 8 years before we came to Australia. It was really difficult in Iran because it was around the time of the war between Iran and Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was trying to overtake Iran. So they weren't a big fan of any Arabs. And so at the time when we did move to Qom, which is like the Islamic center of Iran, and it was very Shiite dominant, and Dad was there to study Islamic studies and progress in his preacher role, for a lack of a better word. But it was difficult. We got bullied. We weren't accepted as part of the community. There was a lot of racism against people of Arabic descent. And it was just challenging. We weren't going to get a citizenship. There weren't many opportunities for people from an Arabic background. And I think Dad worked really hard to figure out how to get us out of there and into somewhere where we might have more opportunities. And I still remember he came home one day with this big old book, and it said Australia in Arabic, and it said Australia, the land of dreams. No way. Then we all gathered around and flipped, and it was like these beautiful beaches and white sands, and he's like, this is where we're going to go. And we were all so excited and happy. Little did we know we were going to get to Australia and live in a housing commission home with lots of cockroaches. And we're like, where are the beaches, Dad? But it was a lovely moment to know that we would be leaving a place that wasn't welcoming us and making our way to somewhere where we could have, opportunities and I guess build a life for ourselves.
Wow. And you came over, this is just because I used to work in immigration detention centers. Did you come on a boat or a plane?
Gosh, the details. Yeah, we came by plane. So Dad came first.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure at the time it was like in 1997. So he came before us. And the way that they would do it is they would rip the passport and flush it down the toilet before you arrive. And then as soon as you arrive, you say, I'm a refugee. Okay. And you're taken to detention. I was really young, so I don't know, exactly. It's like the memory of a 9-year-old. Yeah. And because I'm estranged from my family for the last 11 years, it's never been a conversation that I've fully had as a grown. But yeah, he came in first, was put into detention. He was there for about 9 months, which I'm sure was incredibly difficult. But it was a really brave thing to do. And then we were approved. So he came back and then we all went together. Yeah, it was incredible traveling because I'd never left. My only memories were from Iran, and then suddenly I'm in Malaysia and I see someone from an Asian background and then someone wearing a turban, and suddenly you're somewhere that's incredibly multicultural. And Australia was the definition of that, and it was a jarring experience, I think. Being 10 years old meant that I was quite the sponge. Whereas I know that the rest of my family really did struggle. My older siblings, my parents really struggled assimilating and I guess finding a way to belong.
How did you find Australia to be welcoming at the time?
In a lot of ways, yes, and in some ways, no, because we kind of hopped around lots of houses and we came in with like minus $7,000. We literally borrowed the money to pay for the tickets, I remember. And so we came in with a whole lot of debt, but we just needed to get out of Iran. It was just becoming the situation was unmanageable. Yeah. But Dad is just incredibly, ambitious, and he's quite the hustler. And he made it work. And we had a community. We had a Middle Eastern community that was already there that sort of took us in, and we made friends. My mother and father made friends quite quickly. And for the majority of the time that I was living with my family, and since we moved to a home in Mount Druitt, which, go back 20 years, wasn't the most multicultural place in the world. I remember there was this one time where we were walking to the shops, my mother and I, and my mum covers from head to toe. And, we coming from an Iranian, I guess our experiences in Iran and the Middle East, that was just the norm. That's how we dress. That's life. But we stood out like a sore thumb, and we'd have people, scream outside, out from their cars, go back to your country. Or I remember this one time, this guy threw like a can of beer at us as we were driving. So when you say if it was welcoming, so the reason why I laugh is because there was such contrast. On one hand, we had people really taking us in, a community that really supported us. And then on the other hand, there was a lot of racism.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. Just observing as a white person in Australia, you can see that it's both. You get people that are extremely welcoming, and it's a country built on immigration.
Yeah.
But also the people are racist towards its own inhabitants and people who've come in after on many occasions. So
it's the theme, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm interested always in how these memories shape us as humans.
Yeah.
Right. And, to see you now, we could obviously tell that you're Middle Eastern or something close to that. And
not white.
yeah. You got an Australian accent.
Yeah.
Do you regularly think about your upbringing, or do you feel like you're different than other Australians? Or
Such a good question. I was thinking about it the other day because I was speaking to one of my good friends about how it felt like a different life, almost like a life that I'd lived before. There's such a separation. There are chunks of my life that just feel like separate to who I am right now. There's that time that I was in the Middle East and grew up as a child. And then there's a time that we moved to Australia and adjusted. And then there was a time where I left home in search of more. And then there's me over the last 5 years or so, and this version of me that I'm really loving and really connecting with. But yeah, when I speak to those different versions of Zahra from those different times, it's like I'm speaking to a character in a book or a life that was a past life is the word I'm looking for. But I know that was me. Yeah, and it's not because I'm dissociated from the experience. It's because it's so well wrapped up, and it's almost like the library of all my memories that once used to be scattered everywhere. I picked up each one, made peace with the memory, and put it back on the shelf. And I've got a shelf for childhood and a shelf for adolescence and a shelf for, and it feels that way if I look at it. Yeah. It doesn't stick out like the sore thumb that it used to be. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that in your own journey, you've undergone a lot of therapeutic processes, both sort of official and non-official. Can you speak to what has been the most useful in that integration?
Yeah. In sharing some of my story, the details that you kind of miss is the fact that being a refugee was really difficult. Growing up in an Islamic state in Iran was really difficult. Watching the oppression of women and your own family members, aunties and mother and whatnot, the confusion of being raised in a place that denies you rights, as simple as what we were talking about before, that I couldn't ride a bicycle, that only at age 36, I've now gone and taught myself how to ride a bicycle. But simple things that I guess really common opportunities for everyone we were denied. And that kind of leaves a gap in the needs that were not met. But then you've also got parents who are highly traumatized, who've grown up in war or in really terrible conditions or never received the love, the nurturance, the protection that they needed. And so you've got all this generational trauma that is getting dumped on every future generation, and then you receive that as well. And then I guess the difficulty of coming into a country because you want opportunities, yet on one end, you're trying to make the most of that and build a life for yourself and fit in and belong and whatever it might be. And then on the other hand, you've got, family that's going, don't become too westernized. Don't lose sight of who you are. This is not okay. You can't do this. And so you lose your sense of self in all of that, because when you're outside of home, you're one person. When you're at home, you're another. And you start to feel split and you start to lose sight of, I guess, which version of me is real, which one is true, which one's more authentic. But this one needed to be there, the one with my family, in order for me to be actually safe. And the other identity was me trying to flourish in a new world. So in and amongst all of that, unfortunately, I did grow up in a family that was highly abusive. And I grew up with a father who now, as a psychologist, I can comfortably say had multiple personality disorders, as well as complex PTSD, significant anger issues. And he was just highly unpredictable and quite terrifying, to summarize that. And so it never really truly felt safe. And so the repeated exposure to that kind of parenting, both from my mother and my father, was really difficult. A sense of safety, security, this idea of love in some sense, because Middle Easterns don't express love in the same way. We don't hug, we don't verbalize it, especially in the Gulf region. It's very uncommon, or at least it was for my family. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of everyone. So all of those things put together, I guess, led to a lot of mental health issues growing up. And I think it was right around the age of 25 that it just became unbearable. I'd been feeling the symptoms long before that, especially depression, anxiety. But 25 was right around the time that I left home and I'd, moved out and made the decision that I can't be in this space. I had tried to multiple times, but each time I was brought back with the promise that it won't be abusive, that life could be better, that we could take care of you. But yeah, ultimately at the age of 25 was the final moment that I was like, I need to leave. And that took a lot of planning because to leave an abusive home, a domestically violent home, is no easy feat. But what that meant was the mental health issues just completely, it was like an implosion internally, and it became unmanageable, especially in that first 6 months. I was having nightmares almost every day. I was hallucinating. I was seeing things. The paranoia was intense. Yeah, my symptoms were unbearable, but it was also unmanageable for those around me. So my friends and my partner at the time. And he was patient. He's a delightful man. He was very patient. But you kind of bury it deep. You go, no, that's fine. I'm okay. I can manage it. But I was lucky enough that I was studying psychology at the same time. And that's why I like to say psychology, being a psychologist, has helped me more than it's helped anyone else, to be honest. And so began the work. I remember studying all these different disorders, and you know about the depression, anxiety, and we had a university assignment about personality disorders, and I did the one on borderline, and I was like, is this about me? Like, did somebody write this paragraph on this textbook? And there was a documentary we had to watch. I was like, oh my God, this is literally my story. And that led into some research with Dr. Google, and then eventually booking a psychiatrist appointment. And he was so lovely, this doctor who I still see to this day, about 11 years on, 12 years on. And my journey with mental health treatment began at that point. He diagnosed me with complex PTSD, and he said DBT is probably the best route. So I did 1.5 years of group therapy, as well as weekly or fortnightly individual sessions. And DBT stands for Dialectical Behavior Therapy. It is a therapy developed for people who really struggle to regulate their emotions, who find it difficult to have healthy and manageable interpersonal relationships, who, I guess, struggle to be present in their bodies and remain mindful or connected. And it was life-changing. It really was. Those 18 months where I sat down every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at this clinic with 8 other very dysregulated women, and we shared what we'd been going through every week, the ups, the downs. And it was like one of the first times that I felt like I really belonged. And there's someone who's talking about self-harm and suicide and all of those things that are buried really deep because I thought they were messed up. And if people found out, they'd think I'm crazy. But secret was out, I was crazy. And I had all these incredible people who were just around me, everyday people who were experiencing the same thing. Gosh, it was so validating. It was magical. And every week we'd gather together, learn some new skills and strategies and tools, and we'd share our stories and we'd help each other and we'd cheerlead each other on. And that was transformative, as that was literally my first step into my journey.
That's awesome. Yeah. And just briefly for the audience, people that aren't familiar, and a lot of people will have heard of the term borderline personality disorder or complex PTSD, but what is it like being in that body, having that disorder?
Yeah. Oh, torture. Especially untreated complex PTSD and untreated BPD. I think Marsha Linehan put it best. She said, people with this diagnosis, it's almost like you're dealing with someone who's got 3rd-degree burns all over their body. So to you, a little tap on your skin will feel like nothing, but touch somebody with 3rd-degree burns and they would absolutely lose it. And that's what it was. Things that don't affect others significantly affect someone with BPD. And so the volatility of emotions, the inability to control them and manage them. And once they start, it goes to 0 to 100 almost instantly. And when the pain is so immense and the magnitude of it is so unbearable, you then do anything that you can to make that stop, including harming yourself, in order to slow down the emotional pain and, I guess, focus on the physical pain instead. And that was one of the most common things that people would do in my group therapy. And this is what they were trying to get us to stop doing, finding better ways to actually manage those emotions that didn't involve self-destruction. With BPD and complex PTSD, the commonality is trauma. And it's not just a single incident. Generally, more often than not, it is repeated exposure to a traumatic experience. So, for example, childhood sexual abuse or a home that was really unsafe, or domestically violent home. You're constantly and repeatedly getting exposed to this traumatic experience over and over and over again. So you never truly develop a sense of safety or security in the world. Most people with CPTSD and BPD also have a really gentle and soft temperament. So they were maybe the shy kid or the kid that was already just generally a little bit more sensitive. So there is some genetic factors there, but the environment really plays a massive role in that. And so what you end up getting is people who were invalidated or hurt or abused that end up feeling unable to manage and regulate as adults. So chronic emotional dysregulation, more often than not, is related to childhood invalidation of some sort. So yeah, that's a little quick summary.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's more that you'd want me to go into.
No, I think it gives a good overview of what's it like. It's a very debilitating, like some people would say it's a disability in a way, but people,
yes,
it's easy to, I think, judge people with personality disorders because, to the people around them, it can feel like, they might be being mean to them, or you can never do anything to help them or something like that. But
yeah,
we know that's not true for starters, but it's the person that's suffering it is the one that's hurting the most.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember when I was like, so I've got some BPD traits and this thing called CPTSD. So I started researching, and YouTube is a horrible place to do some research because you've got some really angry ex-boyfriends or girlfriends talking about how BPD is toxic and people with BPD are dangerous and how you should avoid them, and conversations about how they lack empathy, and which is not true at all. It's so far from the truth. In fact, their capacity to feel is so intense, so big, so deep that sometimes they feel too much. In fact, they feel other people's pain. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very misunderstood and highly stigmatized. Yeah.
And just for audience who are interested in this area, one of the things that tends to be like women get characterized as more often as having BPD, but I'm not 100% up to speed with the research, but it may well be diagnosed more in BPD, but there's some common underlying traits, and men typically get labeled with antisocial or narcissistic personality traits or disorders. It's kind of the same, I see it as being the same thing, which is this, often originating from an invalidating environment and parents that are unable to soothe their children, as well as a temperamental sort of vulnerability. But then in men, we know that men, it's more likely, if we're anxious, we're more likely to be pricks or assholes or arrogant.
Yes.
Whereas a woman, the stereotype is more that they're going to be, so-called emotional and hysterical. Yeah, exactly. To use a really good stereotypical term. And so that they often have the common underlying features and are very difficult for the person who's suffering. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's really important to shed light on the person who's going, the true experience of the person carrying that diagnosis. But it's also important to speak about the experiences of those around them. Yeah. And it can be a lot. It can be a lot to deal with for family, for friends. And I see this now retrospectively looking back. I put some people through hell. And I can acknowledge that without putting myself down or blaming myself. I know that I did the best that I could with what I had, but I also know that my explosive emotions really did cost a lot for people around me. And I feel like they had to compromise and walk around me, like, walk around on eggshells around me. And it's an awful experience because all you want is love and connection. And then you've got all your loved ones tiptoeing around you going, what version of her are we going to get today? Mm-hmm. And so it sends you back further into it. So you get angry and more upset and you start self-loathing. Oh, the shame and the guilt and the self-loathing cycle with CPTSD and BPD is immense. So the minute you have an outburst, then comes the shame and the guilt. And that's just awful and heavy. And that's when the self-harm starts. And then you cycle back and you go, behind me now, let's start over again. And you apologize to all those around you. And you might even over-apologize or overcompensate. And then nothing changes because you've not had treatment. So the next time something triggers you, you explode again or implode or self-harm, and then it starts all over again. And enough repetitions of that, eventually your sense of self starts to, it wasn't really there to start with, but then you start to develop this feeling that you're just somehow really bad. And there's something immensely wrong with you, that you're just a bad egg. And the world is a better place without you. And that's when the suicidality starts. And it's just a mess to untangle from. And that's why treatment takes so long and requires so many hours. Group therapy for a whole day, once a week, and then the individual therapy once a week, and then you've got to do it for a year to 2 years. The reason is the brain requires intense amount of rewiring for it to actually change. It's a lot of work.
So you found DBT really helpful. Was there any other type of therapy that was particularly useful in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Schema therapy was great. For those who don't know, schema therapy, it looks at, schemas are patterns of thinking, feeling, behaving, and they're smushed into one. And so there's lots of good schemas and there's lots of unhelpful schemas. And in psychology, we've identified about 18 that are unhelpful. And they're quite common. And most of us carry about maybe a few here and there. Even the most well-adjusted people have schemas. But people with, for example, with BPD or complex PTSD tend to have a lot more. So we might carry a schema of abandonment or a schema of being defective. And there are other schemas like unrelenting standards where you work yourself to death, and the schema of self-sacrifice where I just got to give to everybody without boundaries. And so there's 18 of those and there's different variations. And you can do an assessment with a skilled psychologist and you're able to then understand what are the schemas that you have, how they impact your life, and what you can do about it. Because once that schema is activated, because it's not always on, but once it's activated, for example, abandonment, because I had an argument with my partner, boom, the abandonment schema is on. He's going to leave me. So the minute he goes for the door, I chase him and I go, don't leave me. Or I might do something, extreme in response to that, although he's just trying to get some air and get a break from the fight. So these schemas really control how we see the world, and it distorts our view of the world. And the idea behind schema therapy is get to know them, be aware, understand when they're activated and what your triggers are, and start forming new neural pathways for how to behave now. Mm-hmm. What do you want to do? What's the replacement behavior and thought process that we want to insert now? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for defectiveness, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. We want to change that to I'm imperfect and that's okay. Mm-hmm. I'm okay as I am. And
sounds a bit like, sounds quite CBT-ish if you're like reframing.
It's based on CBT. Okay. Yeah. So the foundation of schema therapy is CBT, but it takes it further. Mm-hmm. So we're talking more behavioral. There's a lot of imagery work and visualization. So you get to dive deep into your childhood with CBT. Kind of really keeps you in the moment of what's happening in the now and how to reframe it. That takes it a lot further with more behavioral strategies and imagery strategies and inner child work. And the therapist becomes a limited parent as well. Okay. So they will also do a lot of parenting and I'm proud of you and you're doing a good job, and they'll speak directly to your inner child. So there's an element of it that's really conducive to like complex PTSD treatment. Whereas CBT, unfortunately, can come across as quite invalidating, which is why DBT was formed. The Dialectical Behavior Therapy model was developed off CBT as well, but with that softer, more nurturing touch.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, schema therapy, it almost sounds like a combination of a few other great therapies, like a little bit of psychodynamic in there as well, and a little bit of attachment focused.
I think that's what he did. Jeffrey Young just kind of went, I like this and I like this and a little bit of that, put it together. Yeah, and it works. It works really well.
Recipe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite ones to use with my clients. They feel really understood and seen.
Is there a typical time frame?
Yeah, look, schema therapy is quite long-term as well. You do it with an individual therapist, and you're looking to do it, again, across 12 to 18 months to create that rewiring, because these schemas you've been carrying since childhood more often than not. Some of them are even pre-verbal abandonment. You could have developed as a schema from the age of 1 or 2.
Yeah. These are very deep-seated memories that are going to take a long time to rewire.
Exactly, yeah.
Just on that note, just going back to what you were saying earlier in the piece around your own childhood experiences and this development of true self versus false self, or you might say different types of personalities in different areas. I think it's another interesting thing for people to know that so-called multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder is probably the more common, like I think the DSM term these days, is it's actually an adaptive function. Like people will say it clearly becomes maladaptive when you're in normal life and the traumas have gone or those stresses have gone, but it comes from a place of needing to be a different person in different places to be safe. Or to have to almost protect you from your own emotions. If one of your so-called personalities or inner personas is so difficult to tolerate, psychodynamically, you would think that you need to have another personality that's actually happy or something that can cope. Or as you really described, there was Zahra that was at home and needed to probably adhere to sort of strict religious and cultural or familial beliefs and protect yourself from abuse and trauma. And so it was an adaptive personality you used there. But then if you'd have brought that person out into school or like being around your friends, they would have been like, what the hell? You don't need to be like that. And so you kind of developed these two parts of yourself necessary. Probably the other part was more your so-called true self, but that might in itself probably took a long time to develop, because now you just seem like, when I talk to you, you seem very comfortable with a lot of these things and it's well integrated and there is true self. Yeah, so also just congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really cool.
I feel like I should get an award.
Yeah.
A lot of everybody should when they go through therapy. Like, well done, you made it through. Yeah. You didn't have good parenting. You did it yourself. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. But I really like that summary that you just gave. I think it is absolutely survival based. I remember when I was younger, I would make jokes about it and go, I'm just like Batman. I'm Bruce Wayne sometimes and I'm Batman sometimes. And I was making light of it, and I guess I didn't have the language for what that was. And, becoming a psychologist gave me that language.
It's funny too how in the psychiatry, therapy world, we do make jokes all the time about we're in it for because we've got illnesses or conditions or issues ourselves. And I think almost everyone, that is a uniform truth. Yeah. Like, even if you don't have a condition or an illness or some sort of thing, there's some sort of unconscious driver, I think, that pushes you into these sort of caring cultures or these psychological professions, because it's very beneficial yourself if you can sort of understand it and then apply the right therapies. Not saying that we all put ourselves through our own therapy, but understanding and then finding the right therapies and being around people that are interested can be very therapeutic.
Highly therapeutic. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we don't admit it a lot of the time.
No, I think, the healthcare community can be like that sometimes. I remember when I worked at Flourish Australia, where they were trying to, I guess, they had a ratio of peer workers versus regular everyday people with no mental health issues. Eventually, they started to incentivize, if you come forward and say you have a lived experience of mental health, we reach our target of wanting to get 50% or more staff that have mental health issues and a lived experience, and they get benefits from work in terms of a manager who understands and supports them through it and so on. And in the beginning, this was like 12 years ago now, remember when I got the job, that had, a colleague of mine was like, oh, do they treat you differently because you admitted that you have mental health issues? She goes, I have bipolar, but I would never tell anyone. And it just wasn't, people don't feel safe to disclose because it has been so stigmatizing for so long. And I feel like that's changing now. I don't know the exact reasons why, but there's so many variables, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But people are opening up a lot more about these things. And I think before we were talking about how I've noticed the most amount of progress sometimes in a moment of stuckness with a client where I may have self-disclosed a little bit quite safely and notice the movement there. So they put you on a pedestal because you're the therapist, you're the one that's helping them. And suddenly you're like, oh, I've actually been diagnosed with this. Or I remember there was a time that this may have happened and this is how I managed through with my therapist. And you almost see the expression on their faces change. And you can hear the cogs moving and you become human and they start to relate to you more. And if you can do it, then I can, and so on. So there's such power to it.
I completely agree. And again, in case people are like, well, of course you should be self-disclosing, the traditional sort of theory, at least in more traditional psychotherapies, is that we shouldn't be self-disclosing because when we do that, we put ourselves at risks of boundary violations and the therapy becoming more about us than about the patient. So that's sort of the baseline. But just as Zahra's talked about, that we come to this point where if you're self-disclosing for a reason to help the person and it's not, for your own unconscious or conscious needs, then it can be extremely useful.
Yeah.
And it makes you more human. I mean, some people would say probably therapists that are more open about what they've been through. Like if you've been through something yourself, you really know it inside out, right?
Yes.
So there would be good, or a psychiatrist that had bipolar disorder, you probably want them as your psychiatrist as long as it's kind of adequately treated because they know exactly the pain that you're going through and how best to treat it, at least from their experience.
Absolutely. Really well said, because the reasons for disclosure have to be for the benefit of the client, full stop. And making that call is really difficult. That's why we hesitate so much to do it. But I think if you're skilled enough, take that little bit of a risk and make that judgment and do it. And for those listening who are, seeing their psychologist, your psychologist is not perfect.
Yeah.
They have their own challenges. They have a lot of issues. But they're very good at putting that aside and being there and being present with you in that session. And they are humans at the end of the day. It's interesting because the sharing for me doesn't happen early on in a relationship with a client. My relationship with that client has to develop to a certain extent. So it does take time to develop that sense of safety and security with them, for them to feel that way with me, and for them to really have the time to explore themselves first without the disclosure has to also be really well timed. And at a certain point in the relationship, I think it just, I've been experimenting with it. It works a lot better later on in the relationship than too early or too soon.
Yeah, I like that. Certainly the experience with me and my own therapist. I've been through therapy for many years as well, that it wasn't till years on when she started to occasionally do that. And it meant, it was a lot more safe at that point. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm conscious of time. Let's move to the present. Well, kind of the present, this is about the self you seek, and you've created this great life for yourself. It's come from, where you started and where you are. You are a hustler, and you've been working now as a psychologist for quite a few years, and you've tried a few different styles of working and places. And so just tell us about your current setup and what's made you, what's that mean to you? Why are you doing what you're doing right now?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey figuring out what I want to do. As a psychologist, what I'm really drawn to, but I don't know if you've had this experience, but we tend to attract the clients most similar to ourselves. Now, as a therapist at least, I find that's been the case for me, where majority of my clients are CPTSD or BPD or some level of emotion dysregulation. And I don't know what energy I'm putting out there, but it's working. And I'm getting the clients that I work the most, I work well with, and they enjoy working with me. So I've been lucky in that I've discovered that slowly and gradually. It's not been a marketing strategy of any kind. It's just organically happened in that way. And look, I started with working for the public system and then working for group practices and working for government organizations, so working with veterans. And I've had like lots of experience and kind of dabbling. And I did it that way on purpose, just to really see what do I like. So when I started my own practice a couple of years ago, found that I was attracting the right client to me, and that was really lovely. But what I did notice is that I found myself pigeonholed in that what you expect a psychologist to become after they graduate. So you end up at a clinic somewhere and you stay there for the rest of your life. You slowly rot away as you help people. It was confronting after a couple of years to go, I love my clients and I love helping people so much. But also this model is not working. The framework that I'm in is not working. So it's not the work, it's not the clients. It's the way we're doing it that just wasn't working for me. Seeing 6 clients back to back every day for 4 to 5 days a week is immense. And shifting and changing. So, your first client and you're getting mentally prepared for knowing what to expect and also reading through the notes and getting ready. And then you're shifting gears for the next client. And by the end of it, the mental gymnastics takes the toll and you've had to move in and pivot so many times throughout the day that the exhaustion mentally is immense. There's such a stereotype of our job is listening. And it's so much more than that. Gosh, it's so much more than that. The work that we actively do with clients. But it just doesn't work long term. This is why psychologists are deregistering left, right, and center. And we need psychologists, we need therapists, and we need them to stay in the job for long enough to be able to support people. And so if the framework we're giving them is making them deregister and quit, it's not a good setup. And so I thought I'd experiment with different things. I was invited to do a retreat by a friend of mine, and they said, look, this retreat I'd never heard of this thing. It was like a retreat for one person, because I've always experienced retreats as groups getting together and doing something magical. But it was like this one person's coming in for an intensive trauma treatment. It is 28 days. They will get 40 hours of therapy. They will be in this beautiful accommodation. They will also receive massages, 3 times a week, and yoga teacher and all of these holistic modalities around them, which is so exciting. And I was like, sign me up. This sounds incredible. So I work with one person and one person only, and I get to do some incredible work with them for a short amount of time in using a modality like EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, which has been shown to work really well when delivered intensively. So it's not one of those modalities that has to be worked through 12, 18, 24 months. And I was like, okay, let's do this. And it was one of the best experiences. I found myself energized every morning. I was ready, and I would do 3 to 4 hours of therapy with this person a day.
Wow.
And we're doing trauma processing. So we map out all of their traumatic experiences from a very young age, and we create this, because EMDR is quite structured in that we kind of develop an idea of what we're doing and where we're going to go. We create a map that we're going to work with. And then we work through the belief systems that this person has had to carry all their lives, how we want to change and shift that. For example, I'm not safe to I am safe now. There's something wrong with me to I'm okay as I am, and so on. And we work away at those memories, kind of like that bookshelf analogy that I said before. The books are all over the floor. We pick each one up, we fold it, we close it, and we put it back on the shelf, creating a little bit more order and structure within within the brain, in some sense, within the mind, and healing those past experiences to support the person to be more present and available to their lives in that moment, as opposed to having to carry the ghosts and the demons of past experiences with them. And it was magic. It worked really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. So this does sound amazing. And the first point I want to make is I really resonate with what you're saying in terms of the mental energy it takes to see multiple people per day and give your all to it is huge, whether you're a psychologist, psychiatrist, or other type of therapist. And I had a similar pathway where I've had to reduce clinical time and do other things because it just wasn't satisfying. And if the lay or the public, just imagine hearing one person a day telling you about all their difficulties and having to hold that space for them, that's really exhausting for most people. Like one person for half an hour to an hour, you'd be like, well, if I need to go, I don't know, jump into the ocean or relax or go get some exercise or have a sleep or something. But like hardworking psychologists is doing that 6 to 8 or 10 times a day, or a psychiatrist. Like it's ridiculous. I don't actually know how people can sustain it. I think you have to shut off a part of your brain and just sort of give people half of you or a little bit of you. And so when I actually think about who I would want as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I want people with really good boundaries that don't see that many patients, because I don't think it's possible for people to actually do that well. But this idea of intensive therapy is one that I haven't really heard a lot of. Like I do know of a couple of types of retreats where they do that. I don't really know. The skeptic inside has to ask a couple of questions just out at the front. One, what's the evidence for sort of long-term, like do they just do it like a 2 weeks of or 4 weeks of intensive therapy and then go back into their environment and regress? And the other question is money. How much does it cost? Yeah. And it's okay if it costs.
Very valid questions. These are really important questions. And the evidence, so intensive therapy, so delivered in a condensed short-term way, is not suitable for everyone, and it's not suitable using all modalities. You can't psychodynamically work with someone 40 hours in 1 month and hope for progress in that same way as it would spread out. Yeah. Time needs to pass, neural pathways need to form. The person needs to go out there and experience life and experiment with the knowledge that they've gained. They need to integrate. So there are certain modalities that you just can't do that with. It's not shown to be effective. But then you've got things like prolonged exposure, and you've got EMDR, both for trauma treatment, cognitive processing therapy. I know I'm, putting out there these random words, but if you get the chance, look them up. These are all trauma treatments that have been shown to have the same effectiveness when delivered intensively as when they are stretched out.
Do you want to pause just quickly and just tell people what EMDR is? Because I think it's really such a good therapy.
It really is. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I don't shut up about it. So with EMDR, the way I like to explain EMDR is your body's capacity to heal itself. So if you get a scratch on your arm, you don't have to sit there and will your body to heal. It just kind of does it. Your mind has the capacity to do that too. However, when you go through a traumatic experience, that the mind's natural capacity to do that is hindered. There's a blockage there. So EMDR is a really exciting treatment that removes the blockages for your mind's natural healing abilities, as woo as that sounds. But it's very scientific, very research-driven, and there's a lot of evidence for its effectiveness and reliability. For trauma, for PTSD, although now it's been studied for depression, eating disorders, OCD, you name it. They've created
probably because a lot of them have trauma.
And addiction and so on, because you can desensitize someone's, and binge eating disorder, desensitize someone's urges and desire for a substance. So as much as you can desensitize someone's traumatic experience, you can also desensitize someone's urges. So really exciting ways that they're using EMDR at the moment. So it isn't a miracle treatment. It's a lot of hard work, and it requires that the person who's engaging in this treatment is ready to sit with the discomfort of reliving some of their experiences. They don't have to actively talk about it, but they need to actually bring the memory to mind to some degree. Although there are even cool tricks and things that we do, the strategies that we have where they don't need to also bring up the memory for too long. So there's special technique where the person literally just touches on the memory and lets it go and talks about a very different experience, and the processing still happens. So there's a lot of incredible ways that we can use EMDR and flash technique to help someone process their trauma. But ultimately, the way that I like to explain it to my clients is we're going to just take the kick out of that memory. We're going to take the memory and we're going to reduce the intensity of the emotions that you feel as soon as you bring up that memory to mind. So if I have a traumatic experience from childhood, I might experience a 10 out of 10 discomfort as soon as I talk about it. We're going to desensitize that. We're going to try to bring it down to a 0 or a 1. Sometimes all we can do is 2, but that's still good. We're also going to change the belief that you carry with that memory. So that thing happened to me, therefore I'm not safe. Or, this happened to me and it was my fault. So ultimately, the processing naturally helps someone move from it is my fault. And this happens spontaneously. This is not me planting any seeds. The person eventually says at the end of the session, that really wasn't my fault. I was just a kid.
Nice.
Or something like that, right?
And the way they do it is literally by, as they describe, eye movement, right? So you're getting someone to look side to side following a stimulus while they're thinking about the emotion. Is that right?
So bring the memory to mind. Okay, now I want you to look at my finger, and I might move my finger, or there might be a dot on the screen. Or recent studies done with veterans, they got them to play Tetris as they're thinking about the memory, as long as the eye is moving to some degree. Sometimes the eye movements are not even necessary. We do bilateral stimulation. You can't see me right now, but I'm tapping left and right with my hands, or you can do it with your feet. Or I currently use buzzers with my clients, and they hold to these buzzers in their hands, and it buzzes left, right, left, right. So as long as there's some bilateral stimulation happening, there's a processing effect there.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the really sort of basic level way that it works is it integrates both sides of your brain. And before that, the theory is that you're kind of stuck in one side of your brain and you're not using the other parts of your brain to process the trauma.
Yeah,
right?
That's very much theory based. No one really truly knows exactly how.
Okay, it just works. It's a magic trick. Yeah.
Like we have guesses about how, but truly, we don't have a full understanding of exactly why it works. But we do really truly know that it does work, and it consistently works for my clients.
Interesting, just side note. We're doing a side note of a side note now.
Yeah.
I haven't looked into it, but there's an interesting theory around the human brain having really poor integration of the right and left hemispheres because we've only got this little bit called the corpus callosum, which is actually quite a small tract going between the hemispheres. I can't remember the reason why it developed that way, but one of the sort of humans' biggest issues is integrating, and that's why some people are just so what we call left brain, and some so more right brain, creative, abstract, and left brain.
Really interesting.
But one of the big tasks as human is probably, unless you just want to be that one side type of person, you just want to be a mathematician or or you just want to be an artist, but that can kind of cause chaos in other parts of life. So it's useful to have access to both. But creating integration, which is what EMDR does, what things like meditation do, is one of our big arguable tasks in life. Anyway, let's not get too carried away there.
No, I like that. Absolutely. That's a really important point. And it is about creating integration.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of summarizes what EMDR is really about. But if you are thinking, if someone is thinking about, is intensive therapy for me, you kind of want to consider, okay, what am I, coming to the psychologist? What am I presenting with? What is the issue at hand? Is it something that can be dealt with in an intensive model? And a lot of the time, to answer your question from before, intensive model isn't just once and done and you're good. You don't have to do therapy ever again. It's continued, ongoing. It's taking away, it's imagining your journey through therapy and kind of seeing the big picture and going, what parts of that can we do intensively, and then doing that. And then the rest you still got to do through the regular model. But also, I don't like to see therapy is like some people say it's a gym for the mind. And I agree with that to some degree because, in order to process some of the things that we go through on a daily basis, it helps to have someone who's not so close to the stuff that we're so close to. So I don't think that we should see that as a deterrent from, doing the intensive model. In fact, it's an important upkeep and maintenance of the gains that were made and ensuring that the person doesn't revert back. Because once you've processed the trauma, you've still got to go, okay, well, what kind of behaviors do I want to engage in now? Previously, I would have angry outbursts, or I would self-harm, or I would avoid everybody and withdraw. And now that this trauma is processed, I'm now trying to adopt some really lovely new behaviors that are conducive to the person that I want to be. And you actually need to be coached on that a lot of the time. You need to really learn how to do that. And that's what therapy a lot of the time is. It's about teaching you what thought processes you might want to adopt and what behaviors you might want to integrate. Pricing.
Yeah. How much?
It naturally, because it depends on the retreat experience. So it is very highly individualized. So you can contact, for example, if you wanted to do a retreat with myself, you'd contact me. We would look at what kind of treatment you'd be needing, how many hours, what period, and you'd be quoted on that. A lot of the time, the intensive model works really well if you've got holistic approaches with it. Again, I'm not going to quote any studies because I have not looked into this, but I am a massive believer of including holistic approaches. So if you've got a lot of processing of EMDR, that's exhausting work, but you also want to be moving your body. So when they do intensive treatments in the Netherlands, which is where it all started, the intensive work, they would get people to exercise up to 2 to 3 hours, like gentle movements and
Makes sense.
Walking. Yeah.
It's common sense.
Yeah, exactly. Move your body. You need to literally be moving your body. And so having access to massage, yoga, boxing, whatever it might be as part of the package is really crucial. It's not frills, it's necessary. So pricing really does depend, but you have to think about, okay, I can either pay someone across a whole year, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, or I could do it in a month and pay that price. Mm-hmm. So you kind of need to see the pros and cons, and it's very individual. You have to assess it for yourself.
Yeah. So is that a range? 10 to 20K?
Oh my God, the range is varied because, if you want a luxury experience and so on. But if we want to just keep it to the therapy and the necessary parts, you're looking at, in Bali, I think the standard price is around $30,000 US.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's no joke.
It is no joke. Yeah. If you're in it, you got to really want to be in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and fully invested, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, okay. As psychedelics become more, I guess, accepted in Australia, they obviously have some TGA authority now, but the cost of the actual programs is still massive. Like
huge. For 20-something thousand.
Yeah, for a weekend treatment, ends up being that. And it is an issue, of course, when people talk about, distribution of care, etc. But a lot of people have the money or the wish to really just get stuck in and do it, even if they don't have a whole lot of money. And this is an opportunity for them to go for it.
Yeah, so, absolutely. We've had people contact us and go, this is my savings and I'm ready. Like, I need the help. I've been, they'll go through an addiction program first and then they'll go through the intensive treatment for trauma because the underlying issues around their addiction has been trauma. So a lot of the time people come in and go, I've tried everything. I've tried the traditional model. It doesn't work for me. It hasn't worked for me. We see movement with people who've been a little bit treatment resistant with the slower model. So that's also exciting. But cost is an issue. And I think we could have a whole session of podcasting on that one around, how inaccessible services are and how difficult it is. And sometimes treatment is for the privileged.
Totally. I had one of the first episodes and this was about therapy just as a method of change, and it's just as expensive. Like there's very few governments that will give significant contributions, and even if they do, it's not really enough for the therapists and typically. So therapy just costs money.
It does.
It's the sort of it's time
the rebates
intensive.
Are terrible. In Australia, they'll give you 10 sessions.
Yeah,
and that's it. And the rebate is like 60% of the price. So it's all less actually. Yeah.
And the reality is there's other things like medications, which typically are going to be cheaper, but they might not address the root cause. But again, people spend money how they want, food, cigarettes, fancy holidays.
Absolutely.
If the driver's there to get treatment, then people will find a way. So typically.
Yeah.
Okay. So look, I think we've covered like a lot of ground today. It's been really great conversation. And I'm just wondering if there's anything else that if you'd like to bring up, or anything part of the story that we miss that you're hoping to speak about today.
Really good question. I think we genuinely covered so much ground, and I'm just really grateful to be here. Yeah. I'm grateful that I have access to a platform like this. I'm grateful to have the opportunities that I have had, the struggles that I have had, and the opportunities that I've had, because both of them have given me a voice that I think might be uniquely positioned to help people. So, I'm just feeling an immense level of gratitude. I feel like I've shared a lot of information and a lot of medical and psychological jargon, so I won't do any more of that, but just want to really open up my heart and just say thank you. I've valued our friendship since the get-go, and I look forward to what our Bali adventure will be like. It's exciting that we both ended up here. But I'm looking forward to what this next chapter of being a human and a psychologist looks like for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching your journey and in terms of first of all, the gratitude is mine as well. And thanks so much for coming in and sharing your story, because I think it's really inspirational and you have a lot of great knowledge about all these areas. So thank you. I think people will enjoy that. And if people want to, secondly, it's just going to be cool to see where the next chapter goes. So good luck, and I'm sure we'll be in contact lots.
Thank you.
And if for people who want to get in contact with you, and we'll put your details in the show notes, but welcome to share them here.
That would be amazing. My website is really simple, zahraciardi.com. And
do you want to spell that for me?
Yes. ZAHRACIARDI.com. My contact details are on there. There's lots of information about some of the therapies that we've spoken about, the intensive approach, a little bit about me. Feel free to just shoot me an email or send me a text message on WhatsApp. I'm very much open to. I don't feel like you need to hold back. You can have a complimentary, no obligation chat. And if I can't be the person to support you, I will certainly point you in the right direction. So I want people to be able to reach out.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Brendan, on The Self You Seek. This podcast might just change your life. We hope you enjoyed the show as much as we enjoyed creating it. And if you found value in today's episode, please consider following and subscribing on our YouTube channel and your preferred podcast platform. Your support is invaluable to us. And please share this podcast with your nearest and dearest, so they too can live their best, most actualized lives.